Is it this one? Yeah, it's this one. Um, first, first, first of all, can everyone see me? I'm quite a small fella, so I don't normally reach above these things. But if I need a box or something, I can do that now. You can see me. So I'm going to tell you about why investigations are essential to our movement, how they have been and why they're more than ever. But before I do that, I'm going to tell you a story. So I hope you're all sitting comfortably. Okay. It's a bit of a slow intro to this story. So fiddling around with everything. I watched the silhouette of 5 dolphins rear up in the wave face and then go left as I stroked over the top of the breaking wave. Just as I had harnessed the previous wave's energy to race down the line, using the fins of my surfboard to spray droplets of water back into their salty home, these creatures were here for the same reason, pure enjoyment. And it wasn't just the dolphins. Nature was throwing a party. Seabirds were base jumping from nearby cliffs, long beaks spitting the water's surface with minimal disruption. Fish leaped and fronds of kelp waved at me as I duck-dived my board under and through the lip of every watery chandelier that broke in front of me. Surfing was my release. It still is. It provides me with an opportunity to see the best of what nature has to offer, even at a time when nature is taking a battering at the hands of humans. But that day, despite all that awe and wonder, I couldn't shake off the giant sheds I'd seen on the road running down to the beach and the foul-smelling odor that grasped onto the long, low cloud above it. As a professional campaigner working on behalf of animals for nearly a decade, I was very aware of what was inside those sheds. Hens. Tens of thousands of them, each one genetically bred to put every ounce of energy they could muster into the production of an egg. An egg so clean and so perfect, surely it could only be laid by prize hens living the most lavish of chicken lives. Not so. These hens were kept locked up in cages so small they couldn't even stretch their wings. It was 1999, I'd taken a year off from campaigning. I was in New Zealand exploring remote sections of the East Coast and seeking out lonely waves to surf. Just a few months earlier, I had celebrated with colleagues a monumental campaign victory that was going to see the European Union outlaw the use of barren battery cages for egg-laying hens. I was ecstatic at the news, but I was also exhausted. The campaign had taken everything out of me, so I needed a recharge before I could contemplate coming back to more work for animals. I dusted down my surfboard, got myself a work permit, and went to visit my aunt in New Zealand, the first stop in what would be a year-long surf trip. A few days later, and having parted with a good chunk of dollars to buy a beaten-up Mitsubishi van to live and travel in, I was sitting on my board beyond the breaking waves. A lull in the waves had got me reflecting on the hens in those sheds. During the campaigning period, I had undertaken lots of talks and given interviews in the media about why it was wrong to keep hens in cages. I had a convincing patter and knew all the scientific and ethical arguments, but I had never actually seen real hens in cages. I considered this a weakness when it came to lobbying, and on several occasions this was underlined when I was undermined by the opposition and also by decision makers capable of creating change for hens. While the campaign had been successful, I couldn't help thinking if there was more imagery available to show people and politicians what life was really like inside those dreadful factory farms, it might be possible to speed up the scale of change. The next set of waves came through and I paddled hard for the first wave. The lip threw out far enough for me to sneak inside the barrel, and for a split second I was enveloped in the swirling watery mass. On exiting, instead of continuing down the green wall that was offering a much longer ride, I directed my board back towards the beach. I was going to that farm, and I was going to go inside. So that was my first foray into investigations for animals. As I mentioned, it was in New Zealand in 1999. I didn't have a plan at that stage. I just knew that when I was talking to politicians, they were saying to me at the time that black text on white paper, the scientific reports that I was relying on to show that hens were suffering in these systems, just wasn't enough for them. They were saying to me, show me the evidence, basically. And at that stage, investigations were still in their infancy. They were being used sporadically, but not particularly well by organizations in a professional sense. So at that moment on that beach, I thought, well, maybe this is a chance for me to go and have a look at what I hadn't seen to date as a campaigner. So I took those first steps, and still in my wetsuit, I drove my van up to the top of the hill. And my hair, believe it or not, I had some then, was still dripping wet, and I got out my wetsuit, scratched around in the footwell of the van, looking for my camera, covered in surf wax and sand, and oh, Jesus, this is not the day. But it didn't stop me, and I didn't have a plan, I didn't have a strategy, I just knew I wanted to see what life was like for those hens in that shed. So I just walked in. And I walked in, and I walked through the first shed. I opened the door, the lock wasn't there, so okay, I can go in and have a look. It was lunchtime, no one was around. I hadn't really thought of that. I just probably got lucky at that stage. And I pulled back the big door, and the next thing I know, I was confronted by, skyscrapers of hens each side of me, necks jutting out for, short moments of oxygen, getting the air that they wasn't really getting allowed in the cages, springing back and forth their necks out of the cages like a cash register at the supermarket till. So it was, a really moving experience. And of course, I did get caught. I heard the door pull back, and then a big guy standing there. Everyone's a big guy to me, by the way. But yeah, he was a big guy, and he's, what are you doing here? And I want some eggs. It's the first thing that I thought of at that moment. And he said, well, you won't find them here. And I was like, well, obviously I will find them here. And they're all making eggs, these chickens. He said, no, I don't sell any eggs. You have to buy them in the shops. And he basically escorted me out of the farm and walked me to the entrance and let me go. But fortunately, I had managed to get some film, and I managed to put it in my pocket, and I realized that I got away with it. And I had something valuable in my hands right then. And, well, what should I do with it next? I'll go to the city. I'll find someone. There must be a group there in Auckland that I can give this to. And yeah, there was. It turns out it wasn't an NGO at the time, which I was expecting. It was like the Body Shop, who were running campaigns against battery cages and keeping hens in cages. So yeah, I gave it to them, and it came in useful for their campaign. I mean, obviously it didn't change things straight away, but it had a value, and I hadn't seen that before. So I thought to myself, well, I'd like to try and do a little bit more of this. I didn't think I was particularly good at doing this. I wasn't experienced in like photography or film. I could write a little bit, but I wasn't an expert by any means to make things look, slick and professional. This was all about getting evidence. It was all about showing the public what, for many of them had been hidden from them, and today still is. It's about exposing the truth, showing them how our food's produced, showing us how animals are, raised specifically for us, for use in laboratories, for use in the fur industry, to put smiles on our faces through entertainment like circuses. So yeah, that was the start of something. And it was a bit of a weird start because today, whilst we're using investigations a lot more in our work, both at a really grassroots level and a more professional level, the people that tend to do those, normally, activists, grassroots activists, who then become volunteers and then maybe get work specifically as a campaigner with an NGO and then become a lobbyist. I did everything in reverse. I was already a campaigner and a lobbyist. I went undercover, and I probably imagine next year I'll probably just be a volunteer again. So I'm doing everything in reverse to the normal process. But that's kind of interesting for me because I think storytelling is a really important component of our work. It's transformational for people. People remember images, they remember the stories of individual animals, and stories, have been passed down from generation to generation. I really remember, the stories my grandmother would tell me, and she would tell me that her grandmother told those as well to her, and they stick with us, we remember them. We don't remember facts as much, but we are a movement that is driven by facts. I think especially right now, facts saturate our lives. They drive us into a new way of thinking. But for me, it's stories that people remember and are possibly perhaps more compelling. And that's why I want you to try and perhaps think about from this talk is the value of storytelling to our movement. And it's not to say ignore the facts, because the facts are valuable. They do get us in front of politicians and lobbyists, and they provide the backbone of many of our reports. But it's stories that people remember. It's stories that change the world, and it's stories that will move things on for animals. So that was a bit of a long introduction. I'm going to introduce myself now. I don't do talks very often. I've done one recently to those great crew of activists in Kiev in the Ukraine at Open Cages. Good work, you guys. That was fun doing that last month. So yeah, I don't normally do them, and as you can imagine, that's probably because this work does make you a bit of a recluse. I am a recluse. I live in a very rural part of the UK, Cornwall. I've been doing investigations for a long time, and every time I come back to the waves that I was telling you about, the surfing, we had really great talks yesterday about compassion fatigue and how to deal with it. That's my therapy, is to get into the ocean, and I never forget anything I've seen, but it just take the edge off it a little bit. So yeah, my name's Rich Hardy. I've been vegan since childhood, so yeah, 35 years I think now. I was brought up in a vegan family, but made my own choices, which is kind of my folks for letting me do that. I wasn't really into activism, like in my early teens. I actually signed for a professional football club in London, the only vegan in the squad, and yeah, they didn't really like that very much. If you wanted to be a professional athlete in the 1980s, saying you were vegan wasn't a good way to do that. So yeah, they kicked me out, and I went into activism instead, and I'm really glad I made that decision. So my first steps into this was compassion in world farming. I've always been animal rights, but in the early 90s, there wasn't really a platform to really be a professional campaigner, especially working on behalf of farm animals. So yeah, I became involved with that organization. So a vegan with a rights perspective, working in a welfare organization. And actually it's worked, and it's got us to where we are today. And I don't think we should ever talk badly of that side of our movement. I think it's less needed now with the way things are going from a sort of a solutions-based perspective and the availability of plant-based foods. So, but at that time, it was hard to do anything more than animal welfare. Yeah, I had that moment in 1999 where I decided I don't want to talk to politicians about scientific reports. I do want to provide evidence for people that can talk to them and show them real life facts and truths that you can argue with. So I decided to, take a back step from frontline campaigning and immerse myself in this, I suppose, mysterious world, because I didn't really know too much about it at the time, and I was learning all the time, as I have been ever since. It's nearly 100 assignments completed, 28 countries around the world. It just shows you how important this side of our work is to the movement. You know, there are so many organizations that have invested time and become very effective advocates through their storytelling with investigations. And yeah, it's probably about 20 that I've worked for. I specialize in infiltration. So originally I was someone who used to go in at night and do things at farms when no one was there. But over the years, I've had to change and evolve and learn new skills. As you can imagine, the more of these type projects there are, the walls go up even higher, and you have to learn new skills to, tell those stories and find ways into places. So, yeah, my particular niche has been infiltration, which is actually helped me in a number of ways. It's actually helped me become a very, in my view, more effective advocate for animals, because spending time with your adversaries, living amongst them closely, being their friend at times, does allow you to get the inside track on what they think and how they feel about issues. And you can use that then as a campaigner to, work out your strategy to get around those things that the industry are worried about. If you know the buttons that you can push that are going to be the ones that they most fear, then make sure you get those into the hands of the advocates like yourselves to take that to the streets. So I have found it pretty demanding, but I've also found it really useful from a campaigning perspective. If you can know what your opposition thinks and does and feels, then it puts you at an advantage. So yeah, storytelling, transformational storytelling, but storytelling is what I'm talking about generally. But yeah, just to put it in context, transformational storytelling involves using a story to make a difference, implicitly a positive difference, to change someone or something for the better. And one of the best tools we have to change this flawed world is a story, one that's told well. As campaigners of farm animals and animals in all of the industries that we're working against, we all use stories to help our campaigns. Maybe sometimes we don't realize it, but we are doing that. What they do is they help us engage, involve, inspire, influence, and get action on the issues we work on for animals. You could say that as much as it would be great if we lived in a world where you could make change by just telling the facts, we don't. People really do need stories. And I think undercover investigations have been a success story within our movement based on that. 10 years ago, we weren't perhaps using them very effectively, but now there's dedicated investigation units. You've heard from Tony at Animal Quality yesterday about the great work that they've been doing. You've got Animal Quality doing fabulous stuff in Europe, Essere Animale, L214. These are all groups that started probably quite similarly to what I was doing, just taking a chance and a moment and seeing what happened, but are evolving their skills and finding new ways of telling those stories and getting the truth out for the public to see, and then more importantly, act on. They do change people's lives. I would imagine, there's probably people in here that saw something related to an undercover investigation or a film that documented one of the issues that we care about so deeply, and that was the tipping point for them to make changes. I'm pretty sure there's one or two of you amongst you where that happened. So yeah, they do change people's lives. They open them up to what's hidden from them, helping them to think differently and live more compassionately, which is what we all want of the public, and sharing our love of animals together. Investigations require careful planning. Sometimes, like I say, you can achieve things just on taking a chance, but you will get caught out at some stage working like that. So, the more time, for those of you that are thinking of doing them or looking to improve the way you do them, the more time you can allocate to planning, working as a team, knowing who's doing what, making sure the roles are clear, the better the chances of fast-tracking you to success. Because I think that's what I like about investigations. Having spent 5 or 6 years working on a piece of EU legislation, multiple demos, lots of sort of reports, lots of lobbying, individual MPs. That process is a very, very long process. When you don't have visual material, when you don't have the imagery that you can provide as part of that campaign, I do believe it really does slow you down. And certainly investigations have, over the past few years, they have cut some time off the length of traditional campaigning techniques would take us to get a result. We can provide them to corporates and retailers and show, how their systems are being cruel to animals, and talking to them face to face. That can result in sweeping changes very quickly for animals, reducing the number of animals killed in slaughterhouses every week. So they provide us with activists with the evidence that we need to create change. But one of the other things I think that is useful about doing investigations is it actually puts us in contact with the animals that we represent. It's quite rare these days for many organizations to have a lot of day-to-day contact with animals. And it's probably why we're all here today, is because we do care about animals and like being around them. We've probably all got 1 or 2 animals between us on average, I would suspect here. Incidentally, this is a hell of a dog-friendly town. It's great seeing them scampering around the venue. So yeah, they do actually connect us with animals, and I know that's a hard story, and it's a story that if we immerse ourselves in, for quite a long time, it can cause cracks to emerge, with our mental health and fatigue. So it's important to manage that as we're being guided and told about this weekend. But it's also important for us to get close to animals, and I think that's one of the things that we should probably go away with from this event. We've learned lots of new things, being helped to work more effectively, but let's not think or give time to the animals that we're working on behalf of as well, because that's basically why we're all here. So yeah, they tell transformational stories, so they're really incredibly valuable for us. One of the things I wanted to talk about here is how important it was that every time you do an investigation, because of the length of time they take, they can involve months or even a year to get the kind of material that you were hoping to get. So when you do finally get that, make sure you really think about everything that you can squeeze out of the imagery and the evidence that you have, because you don't know if you're going to be able to get that opportunity again. And I think probably there is this is something where our movement could improve on, making sure that we do get everything we can out of them. Often we'll tell one particular story when there's 4 or 5 stories within the evidence bank, if you like, that can actually take us on, introduce our work to new audiences outside our animal world. So yeah, don't rush their release. Look at every potential story that comes from them and really plan carefully when and how you can use them to expand your reach. Because we don't want to just, communicate to animal lovers. We need to be, reaching into the hearts and minds of the environmentalists, the people that are concerned about their health. These stories are very relevant to these people. But we sometimes forget to reach out to them. So yeah, take that time to create your strategy and make sure that you don't miss any opportunities. The other thing about investigations is that they do give us credibility as a movement. Like I said, I used to have to rely on scientific reports, and yeah, just text on paper isn't particularly engaging for people. Certainly not politicians, but definitely not the public. So yeah, they do give us credibility to help us with the solutions that we're requiring of society to make improvements for animals. So yeah, they definitely give us credibility as well as the hard-hitting imagery. So what I'm saying is they do provide us with more than just a story about animals. Our tendency is to tell the animal story, usually referencing the suffering, the cruelty, or the law breaking. They're all very important things, and should always be our core story. But beyond this, there are the other stories which are worthy of being told. These are the stories that can add weight to a campaign. Like I said, help us reach new audiences, drive organizations into new investigation work from the evidence that they've learned, or just make us better campaigners by knowing more about the people that are doing the bad things that we want to stop. So what are the types of stories we can capture through an investigation, and how can animal rights organizations make the best use of them? Well, yeah, we're always going to start with the animal story. It's the first and most important message to be telling. You can tell that story from the individual's perspective. Maybe you have an individual as part of your evidence gathering that really stands out. You can use it to really show the industry for what it is. Or you can tell it from like the numbers perspective, especially factory farming. The numbers are just so huge. You can tell the big story with the big numbers. This individual, he's really, really important to me. I have a photo actually on my office wall, which I look at every day before I do anything. I never want to forget him. He's a raccoon that was trapped in a leg hold, one of those steel-jawed devices that are buried under the ground. They're used by fur trappers in North America. And I spent 2 winters in the USA infiltrating fur trappers to document this side of the fashion industry. Yeah, he's really, really important to me because his demise, unfortunately, was very, very sad. It was very tragic. I was with the trapper the day before when he laid the trap in the water. It's just shallow river. But overnight, this raccoon, he'd got caught in the trap. And it was like January, so it was snow on the ground on the riverbank, and the water was not frozen, but not far off frozen. And I arrived the next morning, and I knew something was going to be in that trap, and it happened to be him. And his demise was very brutal. He was bashed around the head and kicked, and eventually drowned. It wasn't a short, painful thing. It took a number of minutes, and it's something I hold on every day, and I'll never forget him. It makes me a very uh, it makes me, I think, more effective every day when I look at him. But the stories of individuals like that, we really should be part of our investigative storytelling platform. The stories are, powerful, and ones that we shouldn't ignore. Again, this is another story about, a little old lady. This is in the forests of northern Argentina. Uh, she was in her 80s. She'd had her home torn down. She was living under a bit of tarpaulin. The water of her well had been poisoned, and the forest all around her was being cut down. And essentially what had happened here is her house and the land that she owned had been grabbed. And it had been grabbed by big agricultural companies in Argentina that want to clear the forest so they can grow soy. And hey, don't get me wrong, I love a bit of soy, and we probably all do, but the soy grown for this is the soy that's used to put in the feed, which goes into the mouths of factory farmed animals all over the world, but particularly from Argentina in Europe. So she was sitting there and I was listening to her story, and I told her that this was all happening so that Europe could feed its pigs and chickens in its factory farms, and she was staggered, She couldn't imagine that that was the reason why all this had happened to her. And it wasn't just her, it was a whole community, and a number of communities like it, because the land grabbing that was going on up there is just going at such a rate. But it's interesting that it brings us back to animals and farm animals. And, for most people, they wouldn't recognize that. So those kind of stories are really the type of stories that I think can extend our work as animal rights activists. We need to be telling all the stories that contribute to animal suffering. So have a think about it from the people's perspective too. And investigations are really great for tracking like the financial stories. Everyone likes to kind of follow the money, especially in business, even in like TV dramatizations. Following the money is a key ingredient of a TV show sometimes. And we can do that for animal rights issues. We can follow the money back to find law breaking or animal cruelty. And it can be a big story. I think it's going to be a bigger story for us. So we should definitely look at trying to tell those stories too. Factory farming in particular is really heavily subsidized by taxpayers' money. EU taxpayers' money is going into big funding institutions like the World Bank and the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. And they're handing that out as loans to, the factory farmers that want to start a broiler chicken farm in Azerbaijan, or the pig farmers that are, expanding their operations away from small-scale pig farming, which is extensive, into huge multi-shed factory farming operations, like is happening in Ukraine, for example. So the taxpayer story is always a really an interesting one. So try and look at that as part of your investigative work. Yeah, the environment. I touched on it briefly a minute ago from the people perspective and that little old lady, but this was on the same project in Argentina. One side being devastated to grow soy for farm animals, the other part of the forest just clinging on for dear life. I mean, environmental damage really is tied into animal cruelty. Going vegan is the smartest choice you can make to protect our planet right now. So let's reach out to those environmentalists. Let's tell them the connections and how it leads back to animal suffering. And particularly after this week as well, with the IPCC report. It doesn't look like we'll have a care in 12 years based on that report. It's pretty pretty tragic reading. So let's make the most of it and try and tie it back into our work. Another really useful story to tell, and maybe it's often overlooked because of, anonymity and confidentiality, but, telling your investigator's story wider than what you would normally do is really valuable for campaigning. They're the eyes and ears on the inside, and you can learn so much from talking to them. So, make sure the people that you do have working for you on the inside, if they are learning a lot by working with workers or managers or people, make sure they it's in their brief to get as much information, not just imagery, because those notebooks packed full of facts and figures are just as important sometimes. And like I spoke about earlier, working on the inside of these industries, whilst it can come at a bit of a personal cost, you do learn so much about it, and you can be much more effective in understanding how your adversaries work, their weaknesses, their fears, like I mentioned earlier. So get as much intelligence out of these people as you can, because it can all be of value to you. It can fast track you to a success. So yeah, make sure you tell the investigator's story if they're happy with it. Or yeah, obviously just silhouette them out like this. Even stronger than an investigator's story is a whistleblower. Their story from the inside as a worker, there's no bias there. It's, a reflection of what they've had from working in these cruel systems. And, if you can tell that story, that's even more valuable. I mean, there's some really big changes that have happened, particularly in the US, I would say, for animals, broiler chickens in particular, on the back of whistleblowers saying, you know what, I've done this, but I don't agree with that anymore. It's wrong. And the health story, again, rarely when I get asked to do an investigation do I get asked to, look at trying to get evidence of the use of antibiotics in factory farms. It's just something I do because I know, it's a big story in the media right now. Antibiotic resistance and health is, a topic that we're, all getting more interested in. It's the second biggest driver for people going vegan. Make that a part of your investigation, so it's not just capture the systems, not just capture the suffering, make sure you're getting those documents, that evidence, those imageries that are going to make your case much stronger. And also, yeah, you can tell the story of the product, when you've done your investigation and, you've found your evidence, you've pinpointed it back to a particular product, take it further back, take it right back to the start. And yeah, there's been some work that I've been involved in over the last 5 years where, provenance and highlighting or devaluing provenance of food has been a really important part of that work. Europe in particular prides itself on, some of its traditional food systems, all the big labeling, the Parma hams, the Grana Padano cheeses, all those big labels, they get lots of finance from the European Union, big advertising budgets to go and expand their products overseas. But, like most of these big names, they might be advertising slow food, but the reality is something very different and something more familiar to what you and I are campaigning for farm animals to stop. So yeah, let's think about formats for investigative storytelling a little bit. Okay, so yeah, you've got your video, that's your standard go-to product. You can have a long format, short format, tell those stories for different lengths and for the right audiences. Yeah, you can use a journalist, work with a newspaper or, one particular TV station or program on that network to partner with you on your investigation. That's, really great tool for getting your story out, at a very, very high level. It comes at the cost of a few other things, but it's often worth doing. Just your standard articles and blogs, get journalists writing for you in other forums, not necessarily, on your own forums. creating microsites to tell the investigative story away from your main site. It's become more popular. Definitely consider doing that. Sari Animali do it very well. Animal Quality do it very well. Make sure you're telling these stories through social media. Snapchat, Instagram stories, Twitter. So not just putting these out as films on your website and into the media, but really going for it on your social media platforms. You could consider doing something like a Facebook Live with your staff, how the investigations made them feel. Not many people are doing that right now, but that would work quite well for investigations. And also, maybe less traditional formats, but, photography can't say that one. Exhibitions. Sorry, I'm a native English speaker. But obviously Joanne MacArthur does this very well with We Animals, and her projects, fantastic for telling this type of story through photography. Poetry. I don't know how many of you have thought about telling these investigative stories through poetry, but again, it's something to be explored. From what I know, our community is a very creative community. We have a lot of art souls within us. Let's make sure, all our volunteers that have those skills are involved in helping us tell the stories in a number of different formats. So, give poetry a go. Prose, well, it's, storytelling. I'm doing a little bit of that at the moment. Projections, has been used before, but maybe not enough. Find the right place, the right time it, with a really good media hook to get your campaign the publicity and advertising it needs. Animations. Not many people are doing this right now, but you could animate an investigation. Why not give it a go? I think it was the Matrix, wasn't it, a few years ago, which was not a bad effort at that, but bringing it back to a particular story, have a think about it. Acting, drama. I've met a few actors actually over the last few days. They could tell some good stories about investigations. Why not put it into a local theatre group or community drama association and other art forms? I'm actually working more with illustrators at the moment around investigative stories than I am with traditional video. I'm exploring, using illustrations to support some of the project work that I've done, and I'm working with a British illustrator at the moment, Vita Slay, to help tell some of those investigations, but in a different format, because a lot of our investigations are quite hard-hitting. There is a lot of blood moving around at times, and there's sometimes a time and a place for that, and sometimes there's a time and a place for this, so don't forget about it. How do I do investigations for animals? Well, like many of you in here that are doing them, and I know I'm talking to some people like that right now, so I've done, as I mentioned, infiltration. These are based on very comprehensive cover stories that get you into places, into companies where you can learn everything from the inside. It's the sort of projects where you are perhaps having to join like a gang, like a fur trapping gang, become a member. It's touchy stuff. It's not for everyone, but they can provide very useful investigative results. Multi-farm, multi-country projects. I've always tended to do this. I've never really been one for doing an investigation at one place, because I always know that the industry are going to say to me or to the group that I'm representing that, well, this is just one bad apple. I don't know if that expression is familiar to everyone, but they'll just say, well, this was a bad one. They're not all like this. This was a bad one. So for sort of 10 years or so, I've been doing big sort of multi-farm, multi-country projects. So 40 to 60 factory farms in 6 countries. And those kind of projects, they do take a long time to do, but they're very difficult to argue against. It's very difficult for a a meat industry to say, well, that was just a bad example, or those farms were just a bad example, because you have gone out and you've got evidence from, in some cases, 50% of an industry. They can't just throw that back in your face. And obviously they're very powerful as well from a media perspective and a political perspective as well. So yeah, multi-farm, multi-country projects, yeah, definitely have a big value in this movement. I've also spent quite a lot of time working on the inside with the whistleblowers and workers, like I spoke about. I've done some projects around laboratories like Indian Ocean, primate trapping. The facilities are so secure, you're never going to get anywhere near them. But you could create a relationship based on maybe a tip-off with a worker, and try and get your material that way via someone on the inside. Trailing and surveillance. Yeah, I mean, that's something I've really only done primarily with documenting the live export trade. Obviously the crisscrossing of thousands of animals every day right across the world. And it's a terrible trade. I've documented it in the Middle East and Europe, North America. It's yeah, it's one of those industries that I think we will crack at some point, because of also like the spread of disease. I mean, a lot of the swine flus, the avian flus, are being, potentially transmitted by transportation of animals. So it's the sort of thing that you think, oh, well, we might get somewhere with this. A lot of investigations I do never actually see the public light. They're used internally. Going to the media isn't always the best approach, isn't the best option. Sometimes it's better to work with your target behind closed doors. Yeah, threaten them that you're going to go public with them, but give them a chance to make a difference. And you'd be surprised at the number of projects that go on behind closed doors where those results are achieved, but without having to go public. Desk-based research, it's not all about going out with cameras or documenting. Desk-based research is really, really important. You can find all kinds of information. Freedom of Information Acts provide you with great answers and results about an industry. Make sure you've got, some of your team working on that side of it. And also they're great sort of preparation for people going undercover in the projects in the field later on. And if you can't do something, pass the intelligence on. Don't sit on it. Give it to someone else who can use it. I really like that approach. I try and do that whenever I can. So if someone other is better to do an investigation, give it to them. So, yeah, so just going back to stories again. Like I said, there's lots of individual components within investigations that often don't see the light of day. But really look closely with the material that you have. And, sometimes there'll be something in there that you could really work with or go to town with, and it might give you a better result than your original plan, just to release something widely that, take a look at it. Yeah, the story of this pig never really went anywhere. Yeah, it was one of those companies I mentioned earlier. I won't mention it again, this one's been videoed. I don't want to incriminate myself too much, but yeah, this sow in a factory farm just left over the weekend with a broken leg in the aisle. Not the only one, there were others too. No care or attention, not in the sick bay at the factory farm. Just left there, cold concrete floors, filth everywhere, temperature dropping outside. It was winter, snow on the ground. And the meat truck came for her on the Monday, so 48 hours after she was left there. And yeah, she became part of the pet food trade. But yeah, an individual story like that can be very emotive and compelling, so don't forget them. The same with this image. This is from one of my North American projects on fur trapping. I didn't really think too much about it at the time. It didn't really go anywhere. This was probably before all the kind of Dominion side of the movement evolved. But yeah, I mean, I think that kind of shows Dominion pretty much right there. This is a reindeer. This is Santa's little secret, really. It's a project I did in the Arctic Circle maybe maybe longer, 7 years ago. Reindeer, who would have thought they were subjected to commercial slaughterhouses, long-distance animal transport? They were just like a farm animal, really, to that industry. And yeah, the suffering that reindeer experience in like commercial slaughterhouses is pretty awful. You imagine a sort of semi-wild animal that's pretty fearful of everything, you know, being cajoled into a truck, antlers pushing into each other's eyes, you know, getting trapped in the truck sides, pushed with goads through the doors into the slaughterhouses, you know, slipping on slippery floors, you know, like trying to keep their footing like they're on a treadmill running, you know, they're just trying to get a footing, but, you know, they're never going to make it when the captive bolt pistol comes in. But reindeer, this was in the heart of Santaland. This is in the heart of where all the theme parks are that families will go to every Christmas to have the Christmas experience with their families. One side of the town is the commercial slaughterhouse. The other side of the town is Lapland, the theme park. Kids queuing up outside Lapland, patting the nose of one little reindeer. 1,000 young reindeer calves of the same age going into that slaughterhouse every day. The irony. We have an expression. Well, it's not really an expression. It's maybe just a phrase. Why did the chicken cross the road? I don't know if it's something familiar in other countries. If it's not, I won't go into it too much. It's always a question that we never really know the answer to, or there isn't an answer. But this was a broiler chicken that I always wonder, not so much why did it cross the road, because I know why it was there. It fell onto the road off the back of the truck that I was following just as it turned into the slaughterhouse gates. I had enough time just to snap a few images, but you know, there was more trucks behind me, so I had to drive on. And by the time I got back, it had gone. I don't know what the story was for that bird. You know, it had been bred for like 6.5, 7 weeks in a factory farm in one of the southern states of the USA. Yeah, it arrived at the farm on the back of a lorry. It'd been in there for that short period, you know, just 45 days old. I mean, these are babies when they meet their maker. The only fresh air they had was on the back of the truck, you know, just watching some grass go by in the pasture, some birds flying, and like, who knows where they were wondering, well, I've got wings, why can't I do that? But yeah, this bird, its only taste of fresh air and freedom was on its way to the slaughterhouse. And it had a little bit more when it fell off the truck, but by the time I got back, it had gone. I always wonder what happened to this bird. Again, you know, this sheep I followed on a particularly long trail from the UK through to a German slaughterhouse. I kept tabs on its progress the whole way and watched its condition deteriorate over the journey. And yeah, well, I know what its fate was, but you know, the conditions that it had to face during the journey, you know, the water drinkers not working, the truck driver not taking the rest stops. Yeah, that story of that number, you know, on the ear tag of the year, you know, that's always, you know, a powerful story for us to retell. I don't really have a story about what this could represent. I just kind of find the image interesting. You can probably just see the ears of the pig and the snout just pressing out from the plastic bag. I don't know, maybe it's a comment on today's society and our use of plastic. I don't know, but I'm just struck by that image. especially with the old lady's tights and shoes. This was in Romania, where animal markets really are quite horrific places to go to. So each one of these images, whilst part of a bigger story, a bigger investigation, could really have been about a story in its own right. And that's the sort of thing I want to leave with you today, just to make sure that you don't, if you do get this material, if you do these type of projects, to make sure you don't forget anything. Because, as I said, you might not be able to ever go back and get that evidence again. Yeah, so just part of my storytelling at the moment, I'm working with a publisher in the UK called Unbound. They're a kind of crowdfunder publisher that want to tell stories that don't really fit in the mainstream public world, and maybe this area of the movement doesn't really do that right now. But obviously there's a lot of powerful stories out there, and I've been exploring not just the stories and projects that I've been involved in, but also the individual stories of the animals that perhaps haven't been told today, the sort of examples that I've shown you, but also the interaction with the people that I've spent time with, the bad people, the bad people that do bad things, the good people that do bad things, and maybe the bad people that justify them doing bad things but don't know that they're doing them. They're all very typical animal rights abusers. So yeah, I'm working on this project at the moment. I'm hoping it's going to be able to go a bit further into storytelling platform. But yeah, if you want to keep up to date about it, I've got, I don't do much social media, but I do have these two platforms. You can follow like the journal extracts from my investigative stories through Not As Nature Intended. Or yeah, if you just want to keep in touch or ask a few questions or see me messing around with my rescued animals, then there's the other one on the right there. I'm actually quitting investigations this year. Yeah, it's been something, that I'm pleased that I've been able to help the movement, passing on to great people the evidence to use and turning into the films that we value every day. But yeah, it's not something I can do anymore. However, yeah, the stories live on through Not As Nature Intended, and my despair at not being able to get many animals out from the situations that I've documented is now being replaced by trying to get as many rescued animals as I can. I've got 17 now from factory farms and slaughterhouses and shelters. So I'm very much enjoying looking after them and seeing them live the stories that all of the animals that documented should have lived or were capable of doing. So yeah, it's nice to spend time with those, and I'll be looking forward to getting back to them later tonight. So that's me done. That's a little bit of a story, and the only reason I'm telling this story now is because I'm finishing, and I just want to, I don't know, pass on a little bit of knowledge and get people about thinking about different ways of doing things that might have been missed. And I really love seeing all the smiles and the energy on everyone's faces this weekend, because I really have great belief in the people that we have in this movement right now. All the volunteers that have come here to the event, all the professional leaders in the NGOs that are spearheading our work at the highest level in government. We're all part of this sort of magic mix of our movement that I think will very soon be successful, but a little way to go yet. But thank you for listening.